The sky looked wrong that Tuesday morning. Not stormy, not clear, just wrong, like someone had taken the usual blue and stretched it too thin. In Nairobi, a teacher paused mid-sentence, chalk hovering over the board. Outside, kids pointed upwards, their usual chatter replaced by a low hum of confusion. The moon, usually a quiet neighbor, now had a giant, silent shadow clinging to it. Not a cloud, too smooth, too dark, too there. Down in the city, people stopped walking. Cars slowed. A vendor dropped his basket of mangoes. They all just stared. Then the voice came. Not through phones or radios first, though it hit those instantly after, but straight into everyone's head. Clear. Cold. Like ice cracking underfoot. Earth. Submit. Kneel by 72 hours. Resistance equals erasure. No greeting. No explanation. Just that. And then silence. A heavy, suffocating silence that made your ears ring. Panic didn't explode right away. It seeped in, like cold water rising. First, the disbelief. A joke? A hack? Then the fear. Real. Sharp. Primal. People ran, not sure where, just away. Shops were boarded up in minutes. The streets, usually alive with noise and color, became rivers of frantic movement. Someone knocked over a fruit stall. No one stopped to help pick it up. A mother clutched her child so tight the little one started crying, not understanding why the world suddenly felt so fragile. Up in Geneva, the air inside the UN building was thick enough to choke on. The Secretary General, a woman whose job was built on talking problems away, stood frozen at her window. She watched the distant lights of the city flicker and die as power grids struggled. Her phone buzzed non-stop. World leaders, generals, terrified aides, everyone talking at once. Everyone scared. Some voices demanded immediate surrender. Better to live under them than not live at all. Others roared about fighting, about pride, about never bowing down. But their words felt hollow, like shouting into a hurricane. Everyone knew the truth. Earth had fighter jets and missiles. Sure. But what could those do against something that parked a moon-sized ship outside your door and spoke directly into your skull? Meanwhile, deep in a dusty basement lab usually reserved for tracking distant stars, Dr. Elias Vance and his small team worked like ghosts. Their equipment, built to listen for faint whispers from alien civilizations, had just recorded the loudest shout imaginable. And it wasn't just the message, it was how it came. "Look at this," Elias whispered, his voice raw. He pointed at a complex graph on a flickering screen. The signal. It's using quantum entanglement. It's impossible for us to do this cleanly. Not yet. But they did it. Perfectly. His colleague, Anya, leaned in, her face pale in the screen's glow. "That means," she started. "It means they've been listening." Elias finished, the weight of it crushing. For a long time. Maybe centuries. Maybe since we first started poking the dark with radio waves. They didn't just find us. They've been watching. The thought was worse than the threat. It meant this wasn't random. It meant humanity had been judged, long ago, and found wanting. They dug deeper, pulling up fragmented data streams buried in decades of cosmic noise. Patterns emerged, records of other worlds. 12 of them. Each had received the same order. Kneel. Each had resisted. Each had been erased, not conquered. Erased, like wiping dust from a table. The Concorde, that's what Elias and Anya started calling the unseen force behind the ship, didn't tolerate defiance. They eliminated it. The clock ticked, 60 hours left. The world fractured. On TV screens, leaders argued. One nation's president begged for calm, urging people to trust the process, to believe in dialogue. Another nation's military chief appeared in uniform, face grim, declaring they would fight to the last bullet. Markets crashed completely. The sound of helicopters became constant, not news choppers, but military patrols over cities, trying to hold back the rising tide of fear. In quiet suburbs, families huddled in basements, listening to the distant wail of sirens. In crowded refugee camps near borders, people who'd already lost everything faced losing it all again. Just as hope was returning, a farmer in Iowa sat on his porch, staring at the unnatural shadow on the moon, wondering if the crops he'd just planted would ever grow tall enough to harvest. The Secretary General knew she had to speak, not as a politician, but as one human to all others. The cameras rolled. Her face, usually composed, showed the strain. The lines around her eyes seemed deeper. The worry etched plain. She didn't offer false hope. She didn't promise victory. She spoke plainly, her voice trembling only once. "They have ordered us to kneel," she said, the words heavy. "They have shown us what happens to those who refuse. We have no army in the sky. We have no secret weapon ready. Our best minds tell us resistance, as we understand it, means death for us all." A collective gasp seemed to echo across the planet. Was she surrendering? Then her back straightened. Her eyes, though tired, hardened with something fierce. But to kneel? To bow our heads and accept that we are less? That we deserve only silence and darkness? That I cannot do. That humanity will not do. We may fall. We may be erased. But we will not kneel. Not while a single breath remains in us. It was the most honest, the most terrifying speech anyone had ever given. It offered no solution, only defiance. And for a moment, the panic quieted. People looked at each other, not with despair, but with a strange, shared understanding. This is it. We stand. Then the sky answered, not with another voice, with fire. A single, blinding beam of light lanced down from the silent ship near the moon. It struck the small cluster of satellites and the newly built EDC defense platform, humanity's fragile, hopeful shield, in orbit. There was no explosion anyone could hear on Earth. Just a sudden, silent flash of light, brighter than the sun for a split second. Then, nothing. The platform, and the brave men and women aboard it, were simply gone, vaporized, reduced to atoms. The message was colder, clearer, and more final than any words. This is mercy. This is what happens when you hesitate. What comes next is not mercy. 72 hours became 71. The world held its breath. The shadow on the moon grew darker. In the Nairobi classroom, the teacher finally turned back to her students. The chalk snapped in her hand. Outside, the city noise had changed. The frantic running was gone, replaced by a deeper, more terrible sound. The low murmur of millions of people, all thinking the same thing, all waiting for the end. Some prayed. Some held their loved ones. Some just stared at the ground, too tired for fear. The Secretary General closed her eyes in her office. The weight of billions of lives pressed down. She had refused to kneel. But what good was pride against a power that erased stars? Down in the lab, Elias stared at the data, a new, desperate thought forming. They've been watching, but have they been understanding? He remembered the fragmented records of the erased worlds, all seemingly logical, orderly societies. What did the Concord make of this world? Of the riots and the people sharing food in shelters? Of the fear and the sudden, stubborn refusal to bow? 70 hours left. The ultimatum hung in the air, thick as smoke. The Archon ship waited, silent and immense. Earth didn't kneel, but it also didn't have a plan. Just fear, defiance, and the crushing certainty that time was running out. The shadow on the moon wasn't just a ship. It was a countdown clock, visible to everyone, ticking down to oblivion. And humanity, for all its noise and chaos, had never felt so utterly, terrifyingly alone. The world held its breath, waiting for the next beam of light. The bunker smelled of dust and old coffee. Deep under Geneva, where the polished floors of the UN building gave way to concrete and pipes, the retired admiral sat at a scarred metal table. His hands, steady for 50 years on warships, shook now as he poured water from a dented canteen. 60 hours. That's all they had left after the sky ship vaporized the defense platform. The world above was breaking apart. Cities burning in some places, silent as graves in others. But down here, in the cold, quiet, the real fight began. Not with guns, but with secrets. A young person with tired eyes and fingers stained with ink from scribbling notes pushed through the heavy door. They weren't a soldier, just someone who'd spent nights hunched over a laptop in a Reykjavik apartment, chasing strange signals in the internet's dark corners. Signals that didn't belong to any government, any hacker group. Signals that itched at the back of the mind like a forgotten song. They'd traced it here, to this forgotten basement room, after seeing military vehicles swallow the UN building whole. "It's real," they whispered, dropping a notebook on the table. Pages filled with equations and star maps. The signal. It's not just from them. It's listening to us. Always has been. The admiral didn't look up. He just tapped the table where a faded file lay open. Project Aegis. 1947. "We knew," he said, voice rough as gravel. "Since the first rockets barely left the ground, we knew someone was watching. Someone who didn't like noise." He flipped a page. Yellowed photos showed rockets launching, not toward space, but toward the sun, disguised as scientific probes. "We didn't build warships. We built ghosts," he explained, slowly, like telling a child a nightmare. For 80 years, while nations fought over land and oil, a hidden group had worked in the shadows. They'd used space junk, old satellites, dead comets, even chunks of rock kicked loose from the moon, as cover. Inside each piece of harmless-looking space trash, tiny machines, not weapons first, but listeners, to learn the enemy's language, their weaknesses, their rules. And later, other things. "Like what?" the young person asked, heart pounding. "Like hope," the admiral said. But his eyes were sad. "And nightmares." He pointed to a diagram. Inside the oldest, deepest buried probes were things that made his stomach turn even now. Tiny vials holding human babies, frozen in time. Not born yet. Just cells, waiting. And beside them, small machines designed to turn alien dirt into air and water. "If Earth fell," he said quietly, "those probes would fly to quiet stars, plant gardens in dead worlds, start over, without us." The young person felt sick. "You were going to leave everyone behind?" "We were trying to save someone," the admiral snapped, then softened. "It wasn't about leaving you. It was about refusing to let nothing be left. But that's not why we're here now." He pulled out another sheet. This one showed crude missiles labeled Sungrazer. The other thing we built was teeth. He described it simply, tiny bombs that could cling to an enemy ship like barnacles. Bombs that wouldn't explode with fire, but with heat. So intense, they could melt the heart of even the sky ship's power source. And swarms of invisible dust, nanites, he called them, that could eat through metal like rust, but 1,000 times faster. We couldn't fight them head on, so we made traps. Silent, patient traps, hidden in the dark for generations. But how do you use them? The young person asked. You can't just yell attack? The admiral shook his head. The traps are asleep. To wake them needs keys. Not metal keys. Quantum keys. Split into 7 pieces. Hidden with 7 families. Families who didn't know what they carried. Just a strange heirloom. A music box that plays a silent tune. A locket with no picture inside. Things passed down, generation to generation, like fairy tales. Hope flickered. So we find them. We get the keys. 3 are gone, the admiral said flatly. Burned in the riots. 2 others we found, but 1 holder. He pushed a photo across the table. It showed a woman in simple robes, kneeling in a garden, tending herbs. A nun. She's a keeper. Lives in a quiet valley. When we told her, she cried. Then she said no. Why? Because she saw what the keys do. The admiral said, rubbing his temples. She saw the nanites eating metal, and wondered what they'd do to living things. Saw the sun grazers melting engines, and thought of the people inside those ships. This isn't us, she said. We don't become the thing we fear. He looked broken. She's right. But if we don't use these, there is no us left to be. Up above, the world didn't wait. While they argued in the bunker, the skyship's shadow grew. Concorde landing craft. Sleek, silent things like black seeds, touched down in the empty snows of Siberia. No invasion force marched out. Instead, strange lights pulsed from the craft, sweeping the frozen land. Then, villages vanished. Not bombed, not burned, erased. One moment, lights in the snow. The next, just flat, empty ground. Like someone had smoothed out a wrinkle. The message was clear. This is what happens to places that resist. Panic, cold and sharp, shot through the bunker. A soldier burst in, face pale. They're moving faster. Command wants the Dark Fleet activated now. They say we should use the nanites on the landing zones. Wipe them out before they spread. And one. The admiral stood up fast. No! The nanites aren't bombs. They're corrosion. They'd spread. They'd eat everything. Their ships, yes, but also the soil, the water, for centuries. It'd poison the land we're trying to save. But it's them or us, the soldier yelled. Is it? The admiral asked, his voice suddenly very quiet. The young person in the corner felt the weight of it. This wasn't just about fighting back. It was about who they became while fighting. They remembered the signals they'd chased. Not just the Concorde's cold command, but faint, frantic, human messages. A radio host in Buenos Aires, playing music for the scared. A teacher in Mumbai recording lessons for when the lights come back on. Was humanity just noise to be silenced? Or was it this? The stubborn, messy care in the dark? Then the bunker lights flickered. Alarms blared. Not the loud, screaming kind, but a low, urgent hum. The computer screens flashed red. Intruder alert! A voice crackled over the speaker. Section Gamma, breached. The soldier drew his weapon. The admiral grabbed the young person's arm. Go! Now, to the server room. There's a backup terminal. Old, forgotten. If they shut us down here, you might still reach the last key holder. He pressed a small, cold chip into their hand. A copy of the quantum key data. Her name was Ilara. She lived near Reykjavik. She knew. She was trying to help me find the others. If anyone can get through to the nun. Gunfire echoed down the hall, sharp and close. The soldier shoved them toward a side passage. Move! And don't look back. The young person ran. Not like in movies, fast and brave, but stumbling, breath ragged, heart hammering against their ribs. The passage was narrow, lit by flickering emergency bulbs. Behind them, shouts. A thud. Silence. They didn't stop. They burst into a small, hot room, filled with whirring machines. The old servers, forgotten when newer ones were built. Dust coated everything. They jammed the chip into a port, fingers fumbling. The screen glowed. Maps, signals. And there, a weak pulse from a valley far away. The nuns' convent. They typed fast, sending the key data. The Admiral's plea. The proof of the Concorde's poison lights in Siberia. Please. Not for victory. For survival. For the children, planting seeds in Tokyo's ruins. Then, the door exploded inward. Not soldiers. Figures in smooth, dark suits. Concord enforcers. Moving with silent precision. One raised a device that hummed like angry bees. The young person threw themselves sideways as a beam of light seared the air where their head had been, melting the computer screen into slag. They scrambled under the server rack, heart in throat. The enforcers moved slowly, scanning. One kicked over a chair. The hum grew louder. They're going to find me. They're going to erase me like the villages. Then, a miracle. A notification pinged softly on a cracked tablet still plugged in nearby. A personal device. Left behind. A message. From Elara. The last key holder. Got it. Sending now. Godspeed. The young person held their breath. On the dead main screen, reflected in the melted glass, they saw the enforcer raise his weapon again, and then stop. He tilted his head, as if listening to a voice only he could hear. Confusion flickered across his smooth face. Then, abruptly, he lowered his weapon. The enforcers turned and left, as silently as they'd come. Alone in the ruined room, the young person crawled out. They looked at the tablet. Elara's message was the last thing on it. Then the screen went dark. They didn't know if the key had reached the nun. They didn't know if the Dark Fleet would wake. All they knew was the hum of the servers, the smell of burnt plastic, and the crushing weight of 50 hours left. The fight wasn't in the stars yet. It was here, in the dirt and the dark, in the choice between becoming a monster or staying human long enough to matter. They picked up the dented canteen the Admiral had left behind, took a long drink of stale water, and started typing again. There had to be another way. There always had to be another way. The world was counting on it. The ship wasn't shiny. It was scarred, patched, and smelled like old metal and stale sweat. Inside the cramped cockpit of the Prometheus, the captain wiped fog from the inside of her helmet visor with a gloved hand. Her breath came slow and steady, but her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. Outside the thick window, the black of space stretched endless. And there, hanging like a bad dream, was the Archon, the Concorde's giant ship, dark and silent against the curve of Earth's blue glow. It looked too big, too perfect, like a mountain dropped from the sky. 32 tiny lights blinked on her console. Not stars, not debris. Them, the Dark Fleet, humanity's hidden teeth, sleeping in space for 100 years, disguised as dead rocks and forgotten comets. The captain remembered the briefing, down in that dusty bunker. Not warships, traps, sacrifices. The Prometheus wasn't built to fight. It was built to die. Its mission, get close enough to the Archon to release the nanites, the invisible rust dust that could eat through even the Concorde's strange metal. And if that failed, slam the ship's old nuclear reactor right into the enemy's power core, turn the Prometheus into a bomb. She looked at the faces around her. 4 others, crammed into the ancient vessel. The engineer, fingers tracing a crack in his console like it was a worry stone. The comms specialist, humming a quiet song under her breath, something her grandma used to sing. The pilot, eyes locked on the navigation screen, jaw tight, and the medic, staring out at Earth, a small, worn photo of a garden taped to his console. Home. All of them knew. None of them were coming back. 30 minutes to contact, the pilot said, voice flat, too calm. The captain nodded. She didn't trust her voice. She thought of the nun's quiet refusal. We don't become the thing we fear. But what choice was left? Let the Concorde smooth the Earth flat, like they did those Siberian villages? Let the lights go out forever? Sometimes, fear wasn't the enemy. Sometimes, fear was the only thing left that proved you were still human, still alive, still fighting for the light. Remember why we're here? She finally managed, the words thick. Not for glory, not for revenge, for the kid planting seeds in Tokyo's ashes, for the radio host playing music in the dark, for the chance. Silence answered her. Not disagreement. Just the heavy weight of understanding. They weren't soldiers, in a clean war. They were people holding a match over a powder keg, praying the spark would save someone, anyone, besides themselves. Then, the comms crackled. A voice, strained but clear. The Admiral, back in Geneva. Concorde fleet is moving. They see you. They're confused. Calling you primitive debris. A shaky laugh. They don't see the teeth in the trash. Good. Keep it that way. Godspeed. The confusion was their only shield. The Concorde expected big ships, loud attacks. Not this. A handful of rickety probes, older than most governments, crawling silently toward their godlike vessel. To the Concorde sensors, it probably looked like space junk caught in a current. Harmless, irrelevant. 10 minutes, the pilot announced. The Prometheus shuddered. A small impact. Debris? Or Concorde defense grid, the engineer muttered, squinting at his screen. They're firing. Small beams. Like swatting flies. Alarms blared. Sharp, insistent beeps. A warning light flashed red near the life support panel. A tiny puncture. Air hissed softly. The medic moved fast, slapping a sealant patch over the leak. His hands didn't shake. Routine, like fixing a leaky faucet. 5 minutes, the pilot said, voice tighter now. The Archon filled the main view screen. Immense. Cold. Its surface wasn't smooth metal, but something that seemed to drink the starlight, making it look like a hole torn in the sky. Beautiful. Terrifying. Comms, the captain ordered. Broadcast everything. Send it back to Earth. Let them see. The comms specialist nodded, fingers flying. Sending live feed. They're watching. Millions. The captain thought of those millions. Huddled in basements. Staring at cracked phone screens. Waiting for the next beam of light to erase their city. Waiting for the end. We see you, she thought fiercely, looking not at the screen, but at the image of Earth glowing below. We see you. And we're not kneeling. 2 minutes. They're locking weapons, the pilot said. Big ones, not the fly swatters. This was it. The moment the Concorde realized the debris wasn't debris. The moment mercy vanished. Deploy nanites, the captain ordered, her voice suddenly calm. Now. The engineer flipped a switch. A soft thump vibrated through the hull as tiny canisters shot free, vanishing into the void toward the Archon. Invisible. Silent. Hope in a can. Silence in the cockpit. Heavy. Waiting. Nothing happened. Did it work? The comms specialist whispered. Too soon, the engineer said, but he was watching his screens like a hawk. Nanites need time. To find the cracks. To eat. Then, the main lights flickered. Died. Emergency red lights bathed the cabin in a bloody glow. Reactor breach, the engineer yelled. They hit the secondary coolant line. We're losing power. The Prometheus lurched violently. Alarms screamed. Smoke, acrid and sharp, stung their eyes. The pilot wrestled the controls, veins standing out on his neck. They're targeting the engine, trying to stop us cold. Can we still detonate? The captain asked, her voice cutting through the chaos. The engineer checked his failing console. Reactor's unstable. It'll blow, but not where we need it. Too far off target. 1. The medic looked up from his station, the garden photo clutched in his hand. Manual override. Get the core into their power vent. It's the only way. The captain met his eyes. She saw the fear. She saw the resolve. She saw the garden. Do it, she said. The pilot didn't hesitate. He slammed the controls, throwing the Prometheus into a steep, violent dive, straight toward a glowing fissure on the Archon's underbelly. The power vent. A direct hit. The ship groaned like a dying beast. Metal screamed. Consoles sparked. The comms specialist was thrown against her restraints, blood trickling from her nose. The engineer fought to keep the reactor from blowing now. 30 seconds to impact, the pilot roared over the din. The captain unclipped her harness. Everyone to the escape pod. The medic shook his head, pointing at the reactor controls. Someone has to hold the detonation sequence long enough for the core to penetrate. Or it blows outside. Useless. Then the captain started. No, the medic said gently. He placed the garden photo in her hand. It was warm. My turn. Tell them. Tell them the seeds grew. He was already moving before she could argue, strapping himself into the engineer's seat, fingers flying over the damaged console. Go! He yelled. The others scrambled toward the rear hatch. The engineer, comms, pilot. The captain hesitated for one heartbeat, looking at the medic. His eyes were closed. He was still humming that quiet song. She ran. The escape pod jettisoned just as the Prometheus slammed into the Archon. Not a clean hit. A glancing, shuddering crash that sent the ancient ship spinning into the glowing vent. Inside the pod, they were thrown against the walls. The world outside the small window was fire and shadow. Then, not an explosion, not fire. A unfolding. The Archon didn't blow apart. It imploded, like a building collapsing inward. The dark surface rippled, then caved in on itself with terrifying silence. The glowing vents flared white-hot for a split second, then vanished. The immense shape folded, crumpled, and simply wasn't there anymore. Replaced by a slow-motion cloud of shimmering dust and debris, catching the sunlight like dark snow. Silence in the escape pod. Breathing, ragged, staring. It worked? The comms specialist breathed. The engineer checked a flickering scanner. The nanites. They found the weak points. The reactor blast. It triggered a cascade failure in their power core. Like poking a rotten tree. It just fell apart. The pilot let out a shaky breath that was almost a sob. They're gone. The Archon is gone. On the pod's tiny screen, the live feed from Earth flickered back to life. Not the Admiral. Not a news anchor. Just people. A crowd in a ruined square in Warsaw, staring up at the sky where the shadow had been. Not cheering. Just standing, hands over mouths, tears on dirty faces. A child pointing. Not at the debris field, but at the moon. Finally clear. Finally just the moon again. The captain looked down at the garden photo in her hand. The seeds. The stubborn green pushing through cracked earth. She thought of the medic, humming his song as the darkness closed in. Not a hero in a storybook. Just a man who chose to plant seeds, even knowing he'd never see them grow. The escape pod drifted, a tiny speck in the vast quiet. Below, Earth turned, blue and fragile. Above, the debris of the Archon began its long, silent fall toward the atmosphere, burning up like dark rain. They'd done it. They'd struck back. But the victory tasted like ash and salt. 4 lives gone. The Prometheus gone. And out beyond the moon, the real Concorde fleet was still coming. Hundreds of ships. The engineer looked at the captain, his face pale in the red emergency light. What now? She watched the dark snow fall. She thought of the nun's words, the Siberian villages, the millions watching from the ruins. They hadn't won. Not really. But they'd shown the Concorde something the Concorde didn't understand. Humans wouldn't just die. They'd fight. They'd sacrifice. They'd find a way to make even rust and old metal hurt. She took a deep breath, the air still smelling of smoke and fear. Now, she said, her voice rough but clear, we tell Earth. And we get ready. Because the hard part? The hard part is just starting. The pod turned slowly, its small engines firing, pointing its nose not toward Earth, but toward the distant, waiting swarm of conquered ships. A tiny, broken thing, flying straight into the storm. Not for glory, not for revenge. For the stubborn, impossible hope that even the smallest light could hold back the dark, just for a little while longer. The rain in Warsaw didn't smell like rain anymore. It smelled like burnt plastic and wet ash. A woman knelt in the rubble of what used to be her apartment building, fingers raw as she dug through broken bricks. Her hands shook, not from cold, but from the silence. No sirens, no voices, just the drip-drip of dirty water and the distant thump of Concorde ships moving through the sky like black clouds. They'd come after the Archon fell, not to finish the job quietly, but to make sure everyone knew. This is what happens when you bite the hand that orders you to kneel. Cities that had cheered the Prometheus's victory, Warsaw, Lagos, Mumbai, were now just empty spaces. Smoothed, like someone had taken a giant eraser to the map. The Concorde didn't bomb. They didn't burn. They just unmade things. And people. One moment, a crowded market square. The next, flat ground, clean as a slate. No bodies. No blood. Just gone. The silence left behind was worse than screams. Back in Geneva, the Secretary General stared at the new maps on her screen. Red dots, where cities used to be. Her office felt like a tomb. The hope from her "we won't kneel" speech had turned to dust. People weren't defiant now. They were hollow. Some begged to surrender. Others whispered about fighting back with farming tools and kitchen knives. Everyone knew it was madness. But madness felt better than waiting. Then the reports came in. Conquered landing craft had crashed in the Amazon. Not shot down. Crashed. Like they'd just stopped working. Inside, they found one Concorde commander, badly hurt, his smooth black suit torn, his strange skin pale with fever. They brought him to a field hospital, a tent strung between 2 broken trees, smelling of sweat and antiseptic. A human doctor, her own hands shaking from lack of sleep, cleaned his wounds without hesitation. A child, maybe 8 years old, handed the alien a cup of muddy water. The commander Vael. They'd learn his name later, watched it all with wide, confused eyes. In his world, weakness meant death. Enemies meant extermination. But here, the people who'd just lost everything were sharing their last scraps of water with the enemy. The doctor sang a lullaby while stitching his arm, the same song she'd sung to her own son before the lights went out in Lagos. Vael didn't understand. How could they be so soft? And yet, so strong? Meanwhile, deep in the Geneva bunker, the retired admiral sat alone at a table covered in star charts. The dark fleet had worked. The Archon was gone. But it cost everything good people. The Prometheus. The last shred of innocence. Now, the real Concorde fleet hung in the sky. 500 ships strong, ready to wipe Earth clean. The Admiral's hands traced a route on the chart. A path leading out of the solar system, toward quiet, empty stars. He'd made the call hours ago. To save the idea of humanity, they had to leave the real humanity behind. Let the Concorde have this broken world. Let the frozen embryos and terraforming bots fly away in the Dark Fleet's oldest probes. Start over somewhere safe. It was the only logical choice. Cold, clean, necessary. But when he tried to send the launch command, the system locked him out. Someone had hacked the controls. Not the Concorde. Earth. Upstairs, the Secretary General stood at a cracked window, watching smoke rise from the ruins of Paris. Her face was streaked with dirt, her clothes torn. She wasn't the polished diplomat anymore. She was just a person who'd seen too much. When the Admiral stormed into the room, his face red with fury. She didn't flinch. "You stopped the colony ships?" he yelled, voice raw. "Do you know what you've done? You've killed the future." "I've saved it," she said quietly. She turned, holding up a tablet. On the screen, Vale, the Concorde commander, sitting up in his cot, watching a group of kids draw pictures in the dirt with sticks. One child handed him a crude drawing of a sun. Vale stared at it like it was a miracle. "Look at him," she said. "He's never seen anyone share before. Not with an enemy. Not with anyone." The Admiral scoffed. "So, he's confused. What does that change? They'll erase us all by dawn." "It changes everything," she insisted. "The Concorde thinks we're just noise. Unpredictable. Dangerous. But they don't understand why we fight. Or how we heal. Look at this." She tapped the tablet. A new video played. An old man in Tokyo, kneeling in the radioactive soil of his garden, carefully planting seeds. Beside him, a Concorde scout drone hovered. Scanning. The man didn't run. He just patted the earth, as if saying, "This is mine. And I'm still here." The Admiral's anger faded. He saw it too. The Concorde's weakness wasn't their ships or their weapons. It was their mind. They saw the world in straight lines. Obey or be erased. They had no idea what to do with people who planted seeds in poisoned dirt. Who gave water to their enemies? Who fought not for conquest, but for the chance to keep trying? "They can't rule us," the Secretary General said, her voice trembling but clear. "Because to rule us, they'd have to break us. And breaking us means breaking this." She gestured at the tablet, kids laughing, hands clasped, sharing bread. They'd have to erase hope itself. And even they can't do that. The Admiral looked at the star chart on his screen. The colony ships, waiting in the dark. He thought of the medic on the Prometheus, humming as he chose to die so others might live. Was flying away really saving humanity? Or was it just running from the hardest part? Then, a new alert flashed. Concorde ships were moving. Not toward Earth. Toward the Dark Fleet's colony probes, still docked in deep space. They'd found them. They were going to destroy the last hope before it could even leave. The Secretary General moved fast. She grabbed the Admiral's arm. "Give me the broadcast controls. Not for war. For truth." Before he could ask, she was typing, sending Viel's testimony, the garden videos, the drawings from the kids, the footage of the Prometheus crew sacrificing themselves not for hate, but for a chance. She bundled it all into one raw, unfiltered signal and blasted it straight at the Concorde fleet. No threats, no demands, just, "This is who we are. This is why you can't own us." The Admiral watched, heart pounding. "You're insane. They'll just destroy us faster." "Maybe," she admitted, her eyes wet but steady. But if they see this... She pointed at the screen where Vielle was now trying to mimic the child's drawing of the sun. His three-fingered hand clumsy, but earnest. Maybe they'll finally understand. We're not a problem to solve. We're a people to leave alone. For a long moment, nothing happened. The Concorde fleet hung in the sky, silent and terrible. The red dots on the map glowed Warsaw, Lagos, Mumbai. The countdown to the next erasure ticked closer. People in the ruins held their breath. Soldiers lowered their broken rifles. A farmer in Iowa stopped digging his useless trench and looked up, waiting. Then, the impossible happened. The Concorde ships paused, not retreating, not attacking, just stopping, like a predator, suddenly confused by the prey that won't run, won't fight dirty, but just keeps growing. In the Amazon, Vale felt at first the hum of his ship's engines cutting out. He looked up at the sky, then at the child beside him, still holding the sun drawing. The child smiled. "See?" he said, like it was obvious. "We don't kneel. But we don't want to hurt you either." Vielle didn't have words for what he felt. It wasn't fear. It wasn't anger. It was wonder, like seeing color for the first time. Back in Geneva, the Secretary General slumped into a chair, exhaustion hitting her like a wave. The Admiral stood beside her, staring at the silent fleet on the screen. "What now?" "Indifference that. What now?" he whispered. She looked at the tablet in her hand, a new message from the field hospital. Vale had drawn something, not a sun. A circle, with tiny stick figures holding hands around it. Underneath, in shaky human letters, "Why?" The Secretary General smiled. A real one this time. Tired, broken, but alive. "Now," she said, "we wait, and we keep planting seeds." Outside, the rain kept falling on the ruins. But in 1,000 hidden corners, people were doing exactly that. Digging, sharing, drawing suns in the dirt. Not because they'd won, but because kneeling was never an option, and giving up was even worse. The Concorde could erase cities, but they couldn't erase the stubborn, messy, beautiful act of trying again. Even when the sky was full of monsters, especially then. The silence was the loudest thing anyone had ever heard. Not the quiet after a storm, but a thick, waiting hush, like the whole planet held its breath. In Tokyo, a farmer knelt in soil that still glowed faintly in the dark, his hands raw from digging. He didn't look up at the sky where the Concorde ships hung, dark and motionless. He just pressed a seed into the dirt, patted it with a cracked palm, and whispered, "Grow." Around him, others did the same. Planting in ruins, planting in ash, planting because it was the only thing left that felt like doing instead of waiting to die. Up in Geneva, the Secretary General stood on a broken balcony, the wind tugging at her torn coat. Below, the city was a skeleton of itself, crumbled buildings, streets littered with broken glass. But in the cracks of the pavement, people moved, not running, not hiding, just being. A woman shared a half loaf of bread with a stranger. 2 kids kicked a dented can down the road, laughing like the world wasn't ending. The Secretary General watched them, her throat tight. This is what they couldn't erase, she thought. Not the cities, not the people, but this. The stubborn, quiet act of living. When everything said to stop, then the signal came. Not a voice in their heads this time. A flickering image on every surviving screen phones, cracked tablets, even a battered TV propped in the rubble. It showed the Concorde fleet. Not attacking, not leaving, just drifting. And then, one by one, their lights went out. Not like engines failing, like a sigh, a surrender. The Secretary General's hands shook as she grabbed a mic. No polished speech this time. Just raw, tired words. They're leaving. They're really leaving. She didn't say why. She didn't need to. Everyone felt it. The Concorde hadn't been beaten by bombs or ships. They'd been confused by humanity's messy, illogical heart. How do you conquer a people who share water with their enemies? Who draw suns in the dirt while the sky burns? Who plant seeds in poisoned soil, knowing they might never see them grow? You don't. But walking away didn't mean walking back. Later, the official message came, not a voice, but cold text on a screen. Earth, you are quarantined. No contact, no technology. You live, you remain. No victory parade, no handshake. Just a cage of silence around their broken world. The Concorde hadn't been destroyed. They decided Earth wasn't worth the headache, like ignoring a wasp nest instead of burning it down. Humanity was free, but it was freedom in a prison of stars. Down in the Amazon, Vale stood at the edge of the jungle, staring at the sky where his fleet had been. The human doctor who'd saved him stood beside him, handing him a cup of muddy river water. He took it, his three-fingered hand clumsy. He'd spent his life believing order was everything. That chaos meant weakness. But here, the chaos was the strength. The doctor hummed that same lullaby while bandaging a child's scraped knee. Vielle finally understood the drawing the kid had given him, the circle of stick figures, holding hands. This is why we fight, the child had said. Because we're not alone. He looked at the doctor. You gave me water, he said, his voice rough from disuse. After what we did, the doctor shrugged, wiping sweat from her brow. You're thirsty. That's all. Vielle touched his chest, where his heart beat in a rhythm the Concorde called illogical. You don't kneel, he said slowly. But you don't break either. The doctor smiled faintly. We bend, we mend. Then we plant more seeds. Back in Geneva, the retired admiral stood alone in the bunker, staring at the star chart. The colony ships, the frozen embryos, the terraforming bots were still docked in deep space, ready to flee. He'd spent his life believing survival meant running. But now, he thought of the farmer in Tokyo, the kids kicking that dented can, the doctor sharing water with an enemy. Running wouldn't save humanity. It would just save a copy, a ghost of what made them worth saving in the first place. He reached for the console. Not to launch the ships, to cancel the launch. His finger hovered over the button. A tear hit the screen. Not for the worlds they'd lost, for the world they still had. Broken, scarred, but theirs. The Secretary General found him there. She didn't speak, just placed a hand on his shoulder. On the screen, a live feed showed the Concorde fleet shrinking into the distance, tiny lights vanishing into the black. Behind them, Earth hung in the void. Not gleaming, not perfect, just there, blue and battered and breathing. They think we lost, the Admiral murmured. We did, she said softly. We lost cities. We lost people. We lost the future we dreamed of. She pointed at the screen, where a new image flickered, a shaky phone video from Tokyo. The farmer, now joined by others, digging in the ash. But we didn't lose this. The Admiral finally pressed the button. Not launch. Cancel. The colony ships powered down, their mission obsolete. Humanity wouldn't restart somewhere else. It would rebuild here. In the dirt. With the scars. Days later, the Secretary General stood at a makeshift memorial, a wall of broken concrete covered in chalk drawings. Suns. Flowers. Stick figures, holding hands. A little girl tugged her sleeve, holding out a piece of paper. A drawing of the Prometheus, tiny and bright against a huge, dark ship. Underneath, in wobbly letters, thank you for the light. The Secretary General knelt, her knees aching on the rubble. They weren't heroes, she said gently. They were just people who did what they had to. The girl tilted her head. Like the farmer planting seeds? Exactly like that. That evening, as the sun set over a ruined city, the Admiral walked to a quiet hilltop. Below, people gathered around small fires not for warmth, but for light, for company. He thought of the medic on the Prometheus, humming as the darkness closed in. He pulled a small pouch from his pocket. Inside, a handful of seeds, wheat, maybe, or barley. He didn't know. He knelt in the cold dirt and pressed them into the earth, one by one, like a prayer, like a promise. Far above, the last Concorde ship vanished into the stars. Below, the fires glowed. A child's laughter rang out, sharp and clear. Someone started singing a simple tune, no words, just sound. Others joined in. Not a victory song, a lullaby, for the world that survived, for the seeds in the ground, for the stubborn, impossible truth that even when the sky falls, life finds a way to push through the cracks. The Secretary General watched from her balcony, the wind carrying the music up to her. She thought of her speech months ago. We will not kneel. They hadn't. But they hadn't conquered either. They'd just endured, like water wearing down stone, like roots splitting concrete, like a single seed, planted in ash, reaching for the sun. Down in the valley, the farmer touched the soft green sprout pushing through the soil. He didn't cheer, didn't cry. He just covered it gently with dirt, shielding it from the night chill. Not because he knew it would grow, but because it was there. Because it tried. And that was enough. That was everything.